Minister, you've been offered £9,000 by a small organisation to run that service. Will that decision be reversed? Will you be accepting that offer?
So we're looking at the figures. However, I was very surprised with the way the Manchester Electric Railway Society did this by just firing out a press release with no dialogue with myself. Extremely surprised by Mr. Nutter's comments, given that I've never knowingly met the individual. He seemed to be making some very clear statements about what my intentions were or were not.
But is it an offer you would be accepting or open to accepting?
I'm open to properly considering in the context of the economics of running a service up Snaefell for a very short period of time. But what I would point out is that the decision was made that back during the COVID period that there was going to be no Heritage Rail run at all this year. What we did on the back of the staycation market and the visitors coming from Guernsey, who are very welcome to this island, we made a pragmatic decision on the basis of some considered analysis that we could open up the MER and the steam railway for a limited programme over the school summer holidays. So actually what Mr. Nutter should have been highlighting was the fact that the decision to close those services had already been made, and I've actually opened up 2 of the 3 services. So I'm afraid Mr. Nutter's way of approaching this hasn't been helpful, and we will of course consider it, but the offer that's been made, and it was very unclear. Even the press release from the Manchester Electric Railway Society was inconsistent, because at one place it talked about a 3-week service, elsewhere it talked about a 4-week service. It's frankly not the way to go about these sort of things.
We are running out of time, but did that decision in the first place have anything to do with safety concerns?
No.
Mr. Shimmins, would you support the department's decision?
I think the offer by
stance, I should say.
Yeah,
sorry.
I think the offer by the Railway Society is really interesting. And if you look at heritage railways elsewhere, they're generally run as societies. They're run by volunteers. And it's clear to me that there can no longer be a blank cheque for our heritage railways. So the fact that the Railway Society is offering a cheque, whether that's sufficient or not, I don't know in terms of the details, I think is an interesting development.
The department's implied that it's not sufficient.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's an aside.
Based on the figures at the moment, it would only be a portion of the extra costs that would be incurred. And bear in mind that we've already made the decision earlier in the year not to run these services, and that's reflected in our budget update that Treasury Minister took to Tynwald in July.
I think it's quite important to recognise that actually heritage railways elsewhere are generally not run by the government. They're not subsidised to the significant extent they are here by the taxpayer. So I think they will continue to need some form of support. But I think it's very interesting that the Railway Society is starting to recognise that and starting to offer real financial support. And I think it's an interesting situation as we look for the future of the Heritage Railway network, because it will be competing against the health service, against education for scarce taxpayer funds. So it, in some ways, it's quite the detail of this, I think, is clearly need to be worked out by Tim and his colleagues. But that recognition, actually, that it's no longer sustainable, perhaps, to constantly for the taxpayer to pay for the heritage railways in their entirety, I think is quite an interesting development. I'm
led to believe that the mountain route, the business case for the mountain route, is stronger perhaps than for other aspects of the heritage railways.
I'm not sure about that. I haven't seen the business case, so I think it'd be wrong for me to comment on that. I think it is important to recognise that the heritage railways require many millions of taxpayer funds every year, and they are very, very expensive things to run. They're wonderful, but they're very, very expensive. So I think it's right that they need to justify that taxpayer expense, just like every other department of government does.
Mr. Baker, does everything have to be profit-making?
No, everything doesn't have to be profit-making. It is about using limited funding in the most appropriate way for the island as a whole. And we have to have a proper considered approach to these sort of things. But just coming back to your point about the business case, we looked at the 3 railways when we were looking at how we could support the staycation market and the visitors, and it was very clear that the two railways which we supported to restart had a lower risk proposition. So that's why we chose those two. The other thing is the Snaefell Mountain Railway is taking passengers up to the top of a mountain and then back down again. Other than the cafe, which would clearly need to be open at the top there, there's not a wider spin-off benefits. Whereas actually the other steam railway and the MER take people into parts of the island and perhaps lead people to spend money in some of our towns and villages across the island. We brought all these things into account. So there was a reason why the Snaefell Mountain Railway didn't get picked to be reopened, and it was because of the financial and operational implications. And we felt the wider benefits were greater on the other two.